humblemud.
Star Fox 64 is easily one of the Nintendo 64's best games ever made. I watched an episode from Mort's Garage recently where he said that he believes Star Fox 64 is the Nintendo 64 game that has aged the best over time. And the more and more I revisit this game, I have to agree. The game has fantastic controls, really impressive graphics even to this day, the music is fantastic, awesome cutscenes, the dialogue is super fun, the characters are super fun. Even playing by yourself, there's always this team dynamic going on thanks to all the banter between Slippy, Peppy, Falco, and Fox, and the enemy Starwolf team is memorable. The slight Star Wars references are really fun. There are multiple means of transportation through the variety of vehicles that you can pilot, and so the gameplay is always kept fresh. There are multiple routes in this game, so no one playthrough is really the same. It can be beaten in under an hour, so repeat playthroughs are highly encouraged. High scores based on how many enemies you kill level after level are really fun to chase, again just because of how replayable this game is. And even to this day, Star Fox 64 is a title in this franchise that still has yet to be topped. But for me personally, Star Fox 64 is an important game for an entirely different reason. Growing up, being the older brother, I introduced my younger brother Devin to a ton of games over the course of our lifetimes, and he fell in love with Super Mario Brothers and things like that thanks to me. But the first game he ever got really attached to and sunk his teeth into on his own, without my influence at all, was Star Fox 64. Back in the day, my family won an eBay auction for a Nintendo 64 with a bundle of like maybe 15 games, and while of course I was all over Super Mario 64, Zelda, and stuff like that, my brother really latched on to Star Fox 64. And I can remember how he would play it night after night in our parents' basement, and he got so good at that game that he had seen pretty much every single route that was possible to see. He would get insanely high scores, and he was really young at this point, like probably 7 or 8. As a kid, he was so much better of a gamer than I was. And from the onset, something that was always really fascinating to me about him as a gamer was that while I would jump between 4, 5, 6 games at a time, playing each one little by little, and kind of becoming a jack of all trades, master of none, with the occasional hyper-focus on games like Earthbound or Super Mario RPG, my brother would routinely, obsessively replay the same one game or 2 games over and over and over, to the point where he really got to an expert level at these games, as much as a kid his age could, and he was substantially better than me at Star Fox. I'll never forget sitting at the computer in my parents' basement, playing RuneScape, and hearing the constant quips and corny dialogue from Star Fox 64 because my brother was on his umpteenth playthrough, and as an angsty teenager being so annoyed hearing that one guy from Starwolf's team saying, "Andross's enemy is my enemy."
Andross's enemy is my enemy.
It was burned into my brain, and at the time, I absolutely hated it. But as time went on and we both became adults, it was this inside joke that we used to say all the time. I would start the sentence and he would always finish it. It didn't matter if we hadn't talked about Star Fox 64 in years, it didn't matter if we had had several beers at this point or if we were sober, that was always one of our inside jokes together. And nowadays, while that was once an annoying memory for me, it's something I'll never take for granted. February 17th, 2025 would have been my brother's 26th birthday, and on his first birthday that I spent without him, I played all the way through Star Fox 64 3D on my 2DS to celebrate him. When I think about the small handful of games that my brother really got into and became a master at, Star Fox 64 was where it all started, and so it's a game that I'm always going to associate with him. And I also decided in that moment that every year around his birthday, I will play some form of Star Fox in remembrance of my brother. I don't really have any restrictions as far as which title I choose or how much I play exactly, but last year I played all the way through Star Fox 64 3D, and this year I played all the way through the original Star Fox 64, running it through Nintendo Switch Online. And since I was playing this on the Switch for the first time since my Declines Drops review last year, I broke out my brother's Luigi-themed Smash controller. Even though I wouldn't say this is the ideal way to play Star Fox 64, especially because that C-stick is is just so tiny and sometimes I get some misinputs. It makes me feel a lot closer to him when I'm playing these games and just really helps bring back a lot of those memories. Like I said, my brother was an expert at this game, and so even to this day I'm still not nearly as good as he was even when he was like 8 years old, especially since I have gaps between my playthroughs, so I always have to relearn things, especially when we get to all range mode. But I think I prefer it that way. I like to have my brother in this mythical place in my head where he was just this excellent Star Fox 64 player, because he was, and the fact that I'll probably never be as good as he was at this game just makes it all that much more magical for me. It's just fun to revisit that world that he spent so much time in. And revisiting it, there's always something new that I find. Like I said, no playthrough is the same thanks to all of those different routes. The dialogue is so funny. I love that voice that tells you good luck before every single level.
Good luck.
And the banter and the trash talk in this game is just top notch.
Hey Einstein, I'm on your side!
Like with all videos about my brother, I prefer to keep this simple and sweet because that's how he liked to keep a lot of things. But before I go, I'm going to tell one more story, and it's a little hard for me to get through, but I wanted to tell it today. Like I said, Star Fox 64 is a game I really closely associate with my brother. So shortly after he passed away, when I thought of things that I would want to have in order to remember him, an original Star Fox 64 cartridge was one of the first things that I thought of. I looked into it and luckily saw that there was in fact a retro game store about 45 minutes to an hour away from the town that he lives in, and so I drove out there on a whim looking for that game. Anyways, when I got into the store, I walked over immediately to the Nintendo 64 section that I found, and I didn't see it. But a lot of the games there were sports games. They were games that were on sale for like $15. So I thought, okay, well this is maybe like the bargain bin section, right? Of course Star Fox 64 isn't going to be in here. So I walked down to the end of the store, go around the corner to the glass case where the cashier is, and I shit you not, every single Nintendo 64 game was laying down on its back in the case, except for a Star Fox 64 cartridge. Now, it's not like Star Fox 64 was some sort of royal Nintendo 64 game in the midst of a bunch of peasant Nintendo 64 games that no one cares about. Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time and all those kinds of games were there too, but the only one that was actually standing up, as if it was standing at attention, trying to get my attention, was Star Fox 64. And not only that, but it was placed in the front right corner of the glass counter, meaning that it was the very first game that I saw when I rounded the corner and approached the counter. It gave me a really weird feeling, but at the time I chose to knock it off and just accept it as a coincidence, and I happily purchased the game. But it was surreal. It was a little weird, right? So then later that night, I was having trouble sleeping, and I got up. It was really late. It was probably 2, 3 a.m. We were a couple days away from my brother's funeral, and my parents had given me my brother's Nintendo Switch after everything that had happened because they knew I would probably like to have that, and I did because I wanted to see if there were any cool screenshots that he might have taken. I wanted to see what games he had been playing, and I just thought maybe there would be something there for me, like some sort of sign or whatever. And so I got up, I went to the beanbag that was in the living room, and I remembered this text conversation that we had had like months prior where he was talking about how he wanted to get all 120 stars in Super Mario 64, and I suddenly thought, oh, that should be what I check out first. I want to see if he did that, because I thought, maybe if he only got 110 of them or whatever, I would finish that playthrough for him. And I knew he had Nintendo Switch Online because he was always telling me about how he was replaying various Nintendo 64 games, and so I decided that that was the first thing that I was going to do. And so I opened up the Nintendo Switch Online app, and I was immediately just awestruck, because he had never really talked about playing Star Fox 64 again to me on the Nintendo Switch. It was always mostly stories about Mario Kart with his friends or revisiting Mario 64. And so I wasn't really sure if Star Fox was something he ever came back to, right? But you can imagine my shock when I opened the Nintendo Switch app and his cursor was last on Star Fox 64, meaning that the last game that he either played or thought about playing was Star Fox 64, as the Nintendo Switch Online app usually remembers where your cursor was last. And just this feeling that was a mix of so many different emotions flooded over my body, and I dropped his Nintendo Switch out of shock. Luckily, like I said, I was on a beanbag, so his Switch was okay, but it just overwhelmed me. and I cried like a baby. I don't know exactly what I believe when it comes to the universe and religion and energy and all of those things. I'm not going to get into that, but I definitely felt like it was just a little too crazy that in a 24-hour time span, there were two distinct instances where it felt like my brother was kind of communicating with me through this little Nintendo 64 game that he played the hell out of as a kid. And I felt like he was there. I will never forget that, and I'm forever thankful for Star Fox 64, especially now, because it's a game that you can beat so quickly. It's so unobtrusive getting into it, you just jump right into it, it has no fat to it, and so if there is ever a time where I feel like I want to be a little closer to my brother, or remember him, or go back through our memories, this is the perfect game. And how amazing is it that it was the first one that he got really obsessed with. And so to this day, the Star Fox 64 cartridge sits at the front on top of my shelf where I can see it every day, whenever I'm making videos, whenever I'm playing games, and I'm forever thankful for it. I plan on playing every single Star Fox game. Thankfully for me, on a selfish note, the franchise isn't extremely lucrative, so there aren't like a ton of Star Fox games. I'm going to play through every game in the franchise and get a feel for it and try to think about what my brother would have thought of these, because other than the original Star Fox 64, I don't think he's played any of the others, so it would be cool to kind of live that experience out for him. And really quick, just to let you know, yes, he did get all 120 stars, and he actually also had two other playthroughs, each with 70 stars, and so it made me wonder if maybe he was getting into speedrunning. I know he always wanted to do that. I think I'll leave it there, but I just wanted to share with you guys around my brother's 26th birthday why exactly Star Fox has become such a special franchise to me, especially because it never really was my franchise. It wasn't my game. That was Devin's for sure. So being able to experience it now is kind of special. It helps me feel a lot closer to him. Like I said, I'll leave it there. I have plenty of other stories to tell you about him, and I will continue to do so. It's in these ways that I feel like he lives on. If you're still here, thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay humble.